air. Happy tonight to have another episode with a special guest. Zach Beck, otherwise known as Upper Beck, has joined the interview here. We're going to talk some prospects, some catchers, and then hear a little bit about the work that he does. So, first of all, Beck, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I was excited to meet a neighbor by happenstance. Nate and I, for the listeners, both in the Twin Cities area. So I was excited when you asked me to come on.
Yeah, we just figured that out randomly, so it worked out. Same time zone. That's always nice. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about your writing and work? How did you get into fantasy baseball and putting out columns and whatnot?
Yeah, it's a great question. I grew up an enormous baseball fan. My dad had 2 season ticket seats for the Brewers from, I don't know, when I was 7 to maybe 17, and we'd go 30, 40 times a year. So
Right.
300, 400 Brewers games under my belt. And then I really fell out of baseball when I was in college. I played my entire life. Then my high school career was over. And I just kind of gave it up cold turkey. And then I graduated and was like, I'm going to work for the rest of my life. And I need something to distract me from that. So I got really back into baseball. And one of my buddies said, why don't we start a dynasty league? And this was 2019 or 2020. And I fell in love with just following and building a farm system.
Yep.
And so I started writing in 2021. This is my 5th year of sort of part-time content creation. The biggest thing that I do that I'm proudest of is I write a top 100 prospect book every year through the lens of points leagues. Last year it was 185
Saw that.
pages long. Real labor of love. My wife didn't love it, but I did. And I post periodically on the Dynasty Dugout, that is Chris Clegg's website, as a prospect writer, a contributing prospect writer over there. So it's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. So you mentioned the Brewers. What era and which players did you see during these games?
I would say like my formative years of baseball, it was a lot of Bill Hall. It was a lot of Corey Hart. It was a lot of Jeff Jenkins and Ben Sheep.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
I have a CC Sabathia jersey from the run that he went on, I believe in 2008. Ryan Braun was an all-time favorite. I defended him when the PED stuff came up, and then that didn't go super well. But I'm really excited about this year's team and what they have going on. And their minor league system is really strong right now. Obviously headlined by a few guys, but pretty deep too. So formative years was a lot of, I would say when the Brewers were finally making the playoffs again, 07, 08, the wild card walk-off against the Diamondbacks in 2011. I was in the ballpark for Game 5 of that series.
Awesome.
And then, 2017 or 2018, the NLCS, also pretty formative for me. That was my senior year of college.
Yeah, it seemed like once they got back into the playoffs, and I guess now the past 15 years or so, they've just been able to consistently put out good teams, managing the payroll coming from a smaller market, but they just seem to keep doing it. And this year, knock on wood, because I also follow like the Brewers, seems like some good things are going in Milwaukee, and I hope they can keep it rolling.
Yeah, it would be an incredible story if they made a run this year. They've made the playoffs, I think 5 out of the last 6 years. They have not advanced in a playoff series since 2018. The whole story with Euchre, and Do It For You would be really incredible. I'm sort of fingers crossed for a Brewers Mariners World Series, because the Brewers were famously, or maybe not so famously, the Seattle Pilots in 1969. So to have 2 franchises that have never won and some intertwined history, I think would be really cool.
So we should probably stop talking about it before we jinx them any further.
That's a good point. They do play in about 45 minutes.
All right. So let's move on then. So I mentioned prospects. So I like to look at catchers specifically and write about catchers. But before we dig into the catchers, overall prospects into 2026, who are some of your favorites? You can talk about the obvious ones, but then beyond that, I want to know a couple of maybe farther down on the top 100 list or
Yeah.
other people that you personally like.
Yeah, happy to. I think right now, I'm just kicking off sort of preparation for my off-season top 100. So it's a lot of making player graphics and pulling stats and what have you. Right now, I think there's a pretty clear top two in the top 100 in a tier of their own, and you can take them in either order. It's Connor Griffin of the Pirates and Kevin McGonigal of Detroit. They are not similar in most regards. They're sort of foils of each other.
Yeah.
Connor Griffin is a big physical teenage, probably has 7 underlying power and 7 speed. He stole 70 bases his senior year of high school. Just a prolific athlete. Real questions about his hit tool coming into this year. He was a first round pick last summer. He has ironed out some of the bat to ball, and it's really allowing his raw tools to play up. Kevin McGonigal, on the other hand, sort of a diminutive guy. He's listed at 5'10", 185. That might be a little generous, but probably has the best hit tool in minor league baseball. He really tore up 3 levels this year. I was a little bit surprised that during their free fall, the Tigers didn't sort of pull the parachute and get Kevin McGonigal in the lineup, because
Yeah.
they were not getting a lot out of the shortstop and second base positions while the division lead was slipping away. So those guys, I think they're going to be the two that everybody talks about as 1 and 2, or 1A and 1B.
Sure.
Outside of them, there are a handful of pitchers I really like. I'm going to choose to talk about Nolan McLean because I think he is particularly interesting. He was a two-way player who actually spent about a year both pitching and hitting in the Mets system before he gave it up, which makes him, he is 24, but in terms of mileage on his arm, it's like he's a 21-year-old because he was splitting time.
Oh, good
And
point.
he, the changeup he's throwing now, or that he was showcasing as a big leaguer, is different than the one that he was throwing 3 months ago. And I think he's emblematic of how quickly pitching prospects can change. And I think he's going to be elite in terms of damage suppression. He's not going to give up a lot of hard contact, and that east-west profile with the two seam and the sweeper is just really fun to watch. He's going to be a pitching ninja regular. I feel fairly confident about that. And then, my homer pick, who's not on a lot of top 100s right now, I think he's a top 100 prospect. He just hasn't played enough, is Josh Adamszewski. He's in the Brewer system. He was drafted as a shortstop. He's played exclusively second base, and he missed some time with a hamstring in the middle of the year. But he is just a hitter. He's not the biggest guy in the world, so he doesn't necessarily pass the bus test. He's not the first guy that you look at when the teams are getting off the bus. But he's just a pure hitter. He had a really excellent season when he was on the field. He's going to be playing in the Arizona Fall League, and that will be a really fun environment for him. And then maybe somebody that even prospect diehards probably aren't really on is Parks Harbor. He reminds me of Garrett Martin in the Yankees system, but he had an excellent year.
I do not know that name.
He was a Georgia and UNC Chapel Hill guy. Was part of the trade for Camilo Doval from the Yankees to the Giants, and his underlying data is really, really strong. He finished the year with a 323, 420, 550 slash line, almost a 1 dot OPS, with a 90th percentile exit velocity that sort of rivals 2024 Roman Anthony. Now, around the periphery, not quite the same. He is also a 4-year college guy. So he's 24 and was putting up these numbers in the lower levels of the minors. But I'm really excited to see if this continues up through Double-A. He's big, he's strong, physical, hits the ball really hard. Everything else is passable. So sort of just waiting to see if there's any hit tool collapse when he reaches Double-A.
Any speed in his profile?
Not
just
really.
more of a slugger, big, strong type.
More of a slugger. He's a corner guy. He's played primarily third base, but eventually I think he'll move to first. He stole 6 bases in 80 games this year, so maybe he could get to double digits at the big league level. But this is a 24-year-old sort of picking on the Florida State League and the Sally League.
Yeah, true. Well, those are some good names because obviously Connor Griffin. I think we all know him. I have actually played in one main dynasty league. I drafted him last year, and now I'm trying to figure out, do I hold on to him? Well, I'm gonna wait until we draft, but the value, I don't know if his value will be higher than this offseason. Things are looking, I mean, so well. He had such a great year. I know I could get a boatload back for him, but the more I read about him, the I don't want to trade him. So what
That's
would you do? What would you do in a dynasty league if you had
yeah.
him?
The cop out answer is it sort of depends on the price. I would have him priced as a top 40 player overall. And that's baking in, whatever risk there is. He's sort of a high floor guy, but all prospects come with risk. Top prospects famously don't pan out a good portion of the time. So
Sure.
if I could eliminate that risk for a top 40 dynasty asset, I think I would. That said, some of the scout feedback that I've heard has been extremely loud on McGonigal. So much so that I am hesitant to share because I think it's an unfair expectation. But I've had, or I've heard secondhand some scouts refer to him as like a surefire multiple all-star kind of guy.
Wow.
So generally speaking, I think my modus operandi with prospects, even though I write about them all the time, is unless I'm very, very confident in them, I'm almost always trading them away, and doubly so for draft picks. I'll move those sort of at will.
Yeah.
McGonagall's sort of a unique one because I think the floor is really high. At the same time, I would have said the same thing about somebody like Christian Campbell in March. So
Sure.
sort of challenging either way.
And he started out great, but yeah, fell off. Not saying his career is over, but yes, point well
Yeah,
taken.
the yeah, I think the sort of player Christian Campbell's going to be is somewhere between what we saw last year and what we saw when he was in AAA this year. I did, watch some recent video on him, and the swing looks not great. The swing mechanics look like they've backed up a fair bit. That said, he should be working with all of the same personnel that got him where he was last year. So his career's not over by any means, and you said as much. But
Right.
expectations certainly adjusted down.
Yes. Yes. I would agree. All right, so let's move into catching. So we were talking before we started. This was sort of the year of the catcher. Cal Raleigh blows up. I mean, a good player, but no one obviously saw this historic season coming. Probably the best season by a catcher of all time. But I think one thing I wrote, potentially he actually overshadowed some really good prospects who debuted this year. And a couple of them made some noise. There were other ones later in the season, maybe more subtle. But I think a good 5 to 7 of them going into next season will really have an impact and kind of are the next guard taking over for some of these people aging out, like Salvador Perez, JT Realmuto, um, some good young stars. So I just want to run through this list. We'll talk about them. Let's just talk about them, but then at the end, I'm going to ask you to sort of rank them in where you like them.
Okay,
All right, fair enough.
fair enough.
So let's start. This is a hard one we're starting off with, but Dalton Rushing for the Dodgers. I think I would kind of give him an incomplete grade. He didn't play much. It was questionable when he was going to get called up because the Dodgers are so good and they have so many talented players. And so I think in a different system for a worse team, he might have got some more time, but we didn't really see enough of him, I think, to form a full opinion, at least personally. What do you think of Dalton Rushing, and will he even end up being a catcher? I think that's the question I have.
Yeah, it's a great question. I really like Dalton Rushing coming into the year. I had him as a top 30 prospect overall. He would have been number one in a handful of systems. I think it's, and you made mention of this, but the Dodgers already have Will Smith, and Will Smith is already on a 10-year, $140 million contract.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
that said, I think there's some flexibility with both Smith and Rushing. Rushing is certainly athletic enough to play a corner outfield spot, and there's going to be some shuffling there in the offseason. I think Smith also his defense was pretty poor this year relative to what we've come to expect.
Yeah.
So some rotating in maybe Smith at first base or rushing in a corner outfield spot could really work out. Or the Dodgers just decide he's superfluous, a la Michael Busch, and decide to move on from him. And that's sort of what you do when the cup runneth over. Um, it's hard to emphasize just how good Dalton Rushing's bat was in AAA last year. The 90th percentile exit velocity was firmly plus, if not 65 on the underlying power.
Okay.
The swing decisions were pretty great. And I know there's another guy we're going to talk about pretty shortly in Drake Baldwin, but they're sort of copy and paste of one another. At least their 2024 AAA resumes were pretty similar underlying data.
Sure.
And so the player that Drake Baldwin is maybe sans some of the defensive ability. I think that's who Dalton Rushing can be with consistent playing time.
Well, the thing about the Dodgers, he could also end up in a different franchise because they tend to move the prospects around. They're trying to win, maybe next year trade deadline, and they're trying to get another pitcher or a veteran. He could move, but yeah, we'll see. Kind of someone I'm not so sure about. We didn't, like I said, I don't think I saw enough of him, but we'll see with him. But let's move on to Drake Baldwin. You mentioned he was sort of thrust into starting right away due to injury, and I put up a stat. This was, I don't know, a month or two ago, but after his first 100 games, his slash line was very close to Joe Mauer's first 100 career games, which is high praise. Obviously, he had a little bit more power, and his average was a little bit lower. But I think people missed just how good he did this season with the Braves being down, and like I said, maybe Cal Raleigh kind of overshadowing everyone, but this guy was an absolute stud this season. So how high would you put him next season with catchers? Like if you're drafting a redraft league, what number would you put him for catchers?
Among catchers is sort of tough. He's certainly a top 10 guy, if not top 5 at the position. I would have him pretty firmly in the top 100 overall dynasty. It's hard to find a hole in what he does at the plate. He swings the bat really hard. He makes tons of contact, and that combination, I think, is really important. He was able to carry a league average chase rate. Like I said, the whiff rate was really great. I think he had an overall miss rate of like 20%, which is spectacular.
Mm-hmm.
And he managed to limit strikeouts. He only struck out like 15% of the time, which is super impressive for a first year MLB catcher who's also pretty good behind the plate. Mostly, in terms of blocking, but I think especially in that Atlanta lineup, there are going to be a lot of runs and RBIs to be had. He only had 446 plate appearances. I think he's going to get more run next year. And so having him as a top 100 overall guy feels pretty right to me.
Yeah, because is it Sean Murphy, right? He was still around. It seemed like the Braves were wanting still him to have a role. But yeah, I think they could probably move on from him, and Baldwin's the heir apparent there. So next, I want to move to the White Sox. So not a lot of fun success for White Sox fans the last couple seasons, but they do have two pretty good catching prospects in Kyle Teel and Edgar Quero. Before the season, I actually thought Teel was going to get the call first. I think he was a little bit more highly regarded as a prospect, but Quero actually came up first. Didn't do a lot, but he didn't strike out much, kept a good batting average, doesn't have a lot of power. Then Teel comes into play, and it's sort of the same question of where are they going to put them? DH, catching, how do they fit? I mean, it's a good problem for the White Sox to have, but
Certainly,
toward the end of the season, I really liked what Kyle Teal was doing. I think he probably has the higher floor. We know he has more power, but things really started to lock in for him like mid-August to mid-September. Um, so how would you put Teal next to Baldwin,
Hmm.
thinking ranking wise?
Yeah, I'm sort of a Baldwin super fan. I've been following him since he was a dual sport athlete in Wisconsin. He played for, I believe, Madison
Oh,
West.
that's right. Yes, he's from
Um,
Wisconsin. I forgot about
hockey,
that.
hockey, and baseball. He was an unbelievable hockey player in Madison. Um, I do prefer Baldwin's bat, but I think Kyle Teal's a better defender, both in the run game and framing. Baldwin sort of does what you might expect a hockey player to do, and that's just get in front of the ball really, really well. Um,
That's
so
where
I,
it
you know,
wins.
I would take Baldwin there, and by a pretty good margin. I think the bat is just that much better. Um, that said, and as an aside, I think the White Sox are one pretty happy that Tarek Skubal exists because Garrett Crochet otherwise was cruising to a Cy Young, and that would feel
Yes. Yeah.
not so good. Kyle Teal obviously in the return for Garrett Crochet. And then two, um, I think Teal is the guy there between Cuero and Teal. I think it's pretty obviously Teal. He's better on both sides of the ball. But Cuero's not a bad backup catcher to have on the roster to take 180 or 210 plate appearances, talking like, 50 or 60 games behind the plate. And rotate Teal through the DH. It's not as though they have a lot of established veterans who are going to need days off there. So being able to keep both guys fresh, I think, is really exciting for them. In terms of real life baseball, I think I still lean Drake Baldwin. If I were sort of had my pick between the two to start a franchise, probably still go Baldwin by a hair, but it's a much closer conversation when we're factoring Teal's defense.
Yeah, and I was thinking of Cuero. If you're in like a two catcher league, a deep league, he might be someone rosterable in the deep enough league as your second catcher, just because he's not going to hurt you. He's not gonna add much, but I feel like he won't hurt you either. So potentially he could be an option, but not a superstar by any means, but
He should
an
be.
above average MLB
Yeah.
player.
Well, and I think for the cost too, right? He's not going
Yeah,
to go early in drafts, even in a two catcher format. So it's not going to cost you much just to have that sort of release valve available to you.
very good point. All right. So next, someone I'm crossing off my list as we go here. Someone who is some of the underlying data not as strong, and some of the hit tool also not as complete, but someone who was a lot of fun for the Marlins this year, Agustin Ramirez. Uh, he put up, I think it was 14 or 15 steals. He hit a number of home runs in a fewer amount of games than some of these other people, and he came through in some clutch games. So again, there was a series against the Yankees that I remember. I think one game he had two home runs. The Marlins won 2-0. Another time he had a couple of game-winning hits. So seemed like a sort of a clutch player. I think fantasy-wise has some value, especially depending on your stat composition. If his average he bases and put up power and speed, which was really fun to see. Like I said, I don't think he's as good of a player as Drake Baldwin or as complete, but from a fantasy perspective, this guy could also be someone who's I could see in the top 10.
Yeah, I'm just checking my Twitter profile to see how many times I've posted about Agustin Ramirez over the years. It's a lot. I really liked Agustin Ramirez as a prospect. I had him at 51 in March in my 2025 top 100. The thing I was always interested in with Ramirez was he swings the ball really hard. If you pull up his
Mhm.
Savant page, I think it's like an 85th percentile bat speed. Some guys get there without it looking very hard. Other guys swing with all of their might, and that is the
Yeah.
sort of ball player that Agustin Ramirez is. And it didn't hurt him when he was in AAA. He managed to have like a 106 and a half EV90, which is about 2 miles an hour better than major league average. It's firmly plus underlying power. And he didn't have, pretty bad zone miss or anything. The in zone contact rate was right around league average. And he's a pretty good athlete. So all of those ingredients together, I was a big fan. And I actually think for his fantasy value, it might be a good thing that he's probably not a catcher. He's a little bit of a butcher back there.
Yeah.
Now they don't have the easiest staff in the world to catch between Sandy and Yuri and Edward Cabrera. So um, it's not a walk in the park to catch those
Sure.
guys. But he wasn't covering himself in glory behind the dish. This year,
Yeah.
I think he might be better used as a first baseman, which for fantasy probably means more plate appearances than he would otherwise get, a little bit less wear and tear. And what happened at the big league level this year was sort of the swinging as hard as you can caught up to him. His ground ball rate sort of exploded. He wasn't pulling the ball in the air as often as he had. The miss rates were up because the major league
Mhm.
stuff is better than what you're seeing in the international league, for example. Um, so I remain bullish on him. You typically expect bigger ceilings from guys who debut earlier than 24, but I still think there's a lot of meat left on the bone for Augustine, and he's going to get a lot of run in Miami as well as they try to sort of ground up rebuild that
Right.
franchise.
Yeah, I mean, definitely a nice find for the Marlins. As they had to trade away. Uh, who was that?
I
Oh,
don't
that
remember.
that was Jazz. That was the Jazz Chisholm trade, if I
Oh yeah,
recall. Yeah, to the Yankees. So obviously he's been good for the Yankees, but as the Marlins rebuild, I think he's going to be a big piece of that. So next, I noticed you're wearing a Baltimore Orioles hat, and so I want to ask you about a couple of Baltimore Orioles. So Adley Rutschman, who looked like the potential franchise superstar, maybe the best catcher in the game at one point a couple of years ago. He's kind of been up and down. He was hurt this season a few times, never really put it together. Samuel Basallo debuts. The Orioles sign him to a deal, long-term extension within like the first week of even being in the bigs. So I'm wondering what you think about Adley's future in Baltimore. That's part A of the question. Part B, Basallo seems like he might have the highest ceiling of any of these players. So that's the second part. But I don't know if you're an Orioles expert or you just it's a clean logo. But what do you think about the catching situation there?
yeah. So about the hat, one of my best friends, guy who stood in my wedding, moved to Baltimore when his wife got a job on the East Coast a few years ago, and so he brought me back a hat.
That's a nice
Um,
hat.
I love the old school logo.
Yeah.
I think it's so clean and nostalgic. So not a Baltimore super
Okay.
fan, but
Okay.
I'm a fan of my friend Owen, and he has sort of adopted them as a second team. So I think on Adley's one of the tougher players I think to evaluate right now. He had a hand or a wrist injury in the middle of 2024, and you can sort of draw a straight line before and after. His production, at least at the plate. He's never been sort of an outlier damage on contact guy. He's hit the ball reasonably hard. He's had reasonable angles. A lot of what he did well is what I would sort of call between the ears stuff. He does not swing out of the zone. He makes a ton of contact when he does
Mhm.
swing. He walks a lot. He doesn't strike out very much. He was a pretty high floor prospect who was good behind the plate. And I think that injury to his hand, which I'm told are important for hitting, um, really, interrupted what he had going on there. I think there was also some conversation because the Orioles took two nominal catchers with their first two picks. In this summer's draft, there was some conversation about, have the Orioles sort of given up on Adley Rutschman? Are they gearing up to get rid of him, maybe in pursuit of some pitching? I don't really
Yeah.
see that being the case. I think Adley's still the long-term catcher there, which sort of dovetails nicely with the Samuel Basayo conversation because I think he's a lot like Agustin Ramirez in the sense that he's probably not a full-time catcher.
Right. Yeah.
Some of the changes that are coming to the rules, namely the challenge system next year, I think take some pressure off of catchers to be really excellent framers, which bodes well for Basayo. I mean, defensively, he's basically a howitzer attached to some catcher's gear. He
Yeah.
has
He's
a phenomenal arm,
a
and that's
work in
basically it.
progress beyond that. Yeah.
But the bat looks unbelievable. Maybe the only nit you could pick is he likes to go fishing out of the zone a lot. That was really what he struggled with in his small MLB sample here. He chased over 40% of the time, which is kind of pushing Pete Crow Armstrong territory.
Mhm.
He'll have to cut that back. Is around 33% of the time. In the minors, at least in publicly available Statcast leagues, which is AAA and the Florida State League. He does enough damage to get away with chasing around a third of the time. Um, but I think like what we saw was a really young guy just seeing big league pitching for the first time and sort of getting flummoxed. I
Yeah.
do think his bat will play at first base.
I mean, even with, I think he might have turned 21 right when he got called up or right before. I don't know. He was 20 for most of the season, I think. But you
Mhm.
could still see the flashes. Like even with the struggles, you could see the potential and the power. Um, I think he's going to be a really good ball player.
I think so too. This is sort of off the beaten path, but we've seen a handful of O's hitting prospects come up and really struggle for their first 30 or 50 games. Jackson Holiday is probably the most notable one.
Good point.
Um, but Kobe Mayo did the same thing, and Heston Kjerstad hasn't really stuck in the way that they
Yeah.
thought they would. And then Basayo comes up and struggles through about 30 games. So part of me is wondering what Mike Elias and the player development group are doing to prepare these guys for big league competition because the gulf between AAA and MLB is as wide as I can remember it being.
That's a really good point because I I mean 2 years ago, even the beginning of last season, everyone's talking about how stacked Baltimore's system is, but you're right, not most of these people haven't panned out in the way we thought they were going to, or they've had really long sustained struggle periods where
Yeah.
Jackson Holiday, I mean, he did better and had some success, I would say, this season at times, but I mean, people were talking about him like, I don't know, close to probably Griffin, like that level of hype, just a couple years ago. So yeah, that's a very good point. We'll see what happens. So I have a couple more questions here, and then we can wrap things up. So, sort of an under the radar name among all these catchers, someone with the Kansas City Royals by the name of Carter Jensen. He really came on the last uh, month of the season. I think sort of a surprise call up. I don't think a lot of people saw that coming, but he actually put up the better numbers than some of the others that we talked about on this list and seemed to adjust quickly. Maybe this was beginner's luck, but he looks like a potential gem going into next season.
Yeah, Carter Jensen is also a really cool story. He's from the Kansas City area and grew up a Royals fan his entire life. He's sort of shared some fond memories of
Well, that's cool.
their World Series team. And so for him to come up and just be awesome right away was really cool. I have been. It's funny that you bring him up because we're talking about a handful of players that I would consider myself a high guy on, or whatever else you would call that in the industry.
Sure.
Um, I had Carter Jensen as a top 80 prospect last offseason. I think he is pretty prolific at doing the whole Isak Paredes, get the ball in the air and yank it down the line. And he did a lot of that. When he was up at the big league level, his savant page is sort of ridiculous. Um, I
Yeah.
don't know that he's the best catcher in the world. It's also interesting that they have sort of not an exact clone, maybe a little bit more athletic, but much more raw prospect in their system in Blake Mitchell. So
Mhm.
an exciting tandem in Kansas City. And I feel like Royals fans should be um, feeling pretty confident about handing the torch off. Now, obviously, I don't think what Carter Jensen did down the stretch is true talent level. he's going to come back to earth. But as
Yeah.
far as catchers with the stick, I think um, I would be unsurprised to see him have as productive or more productive a career than some of the guys that we've talked about, Kyle Teal, Augustine Ramirez. It would be unsurprising to me if he was a better offensive force than either of those guys.
I think that's a good assessment. So looking toward 2026, among catchers who have not debuted or prospects who have not debuted, so none of the people we talked about, who do you like the best as a catching prospect overall?
Of guys that have not debuted. So I put out a top 100 in August, which is fairly unusual for me. And I'm going to sort of self-select here out of guys that are nominally catchers, but I don't think will actually catch full time. So that eliminates guys like Moises Ballesteros, like Irish, who's one of the two catchers that the Orioles took last summer, who's probably just an outfielder, sort of Dalton Varsho esque. The next guy that comes up who's not debuted, and it's funny, there's a cohort of 3 or 4 um, teenage catching prospects that I like a lot. I'm going to go with Alfredo Duno in the red system. He is, one way to put it would be conspicuous. He is a large guy. You can't miss him on the diamond. He's 6'4". I think he's listed at like 215 pounds. That is at least 25 pounds short. Um, and he, for his size, is he's so flexible and he moves so well. It's sort of it doesn't really the way that he moves behind the plate does not look natural at all. Because he is just so smooth behind the plate. He's a work in progress. There, I've seen some laughers out of him on video. Not a great framer, not a great receiver. But I think he can come around. What's really special about him is the bat. He hits the ball extraordinarily hard for a teenager, particularly for a teenage catching prospect. Um, I think he could be a 30 home run annual bat. At the peak of his powers. Um, and I sort of Diego Cartaya comes to mind anytime I'm talking about a teenage catching prospect. Is just the error bars on these guys are
Yeah.
so wide. And I mean, there's positive variance, right? We could see a 90th percentile outcome on Alfredo Duno that makes him an all star, right? Or we could see sort of negative variance there where he sort of flames out in double A when he's finally seeing pretty good pitching.
Yeah.
He has sort of the same problem that Samuel Basayo has, which is I'm a big guy and I hit the ball extremely hard, so I want to swing at everything. That's sort of his affliction, but the bat to ball is pretty good. The other guys that I would put in the same ballpark are Eduardo Tait, who was in the Philly system to open the year, came over to the Twins at the deadline.
That's right.
Um,
Yep. Okay.
Similar situation, but he swings it from the left side of the plate. A lot of raw power. He's not quite as physically impressive as Alfredo Duno. I don't think he has quite the same raw tools, but likes to swing at everything too. Has plenty of power to justify it. But we'll see how that hit tool holds up as he sees um, better pitching. And then the other guy would be Rainiel Rodriguez. He is a righty, or he hits righty. All these guys throw righty. In the Cardinal system, he is, if I said Carter Jensen was the Isaac Paredes guy, it's actually Rainiel Rodriguez. He is the pulled fly ball king. Um, and he does a ton of pull side damage. He had sort of an unbelievable run at the complex level and then moved up, I believe, in May and continued to produce really well. I've seen him, as high as top 25 in some public rankings.
Wow.
That's a little too rich for me, just because I've sort of done the teenage catcher song and dance, and for fantasy, these guys really they top out at like 450 plate appearances. I think in 2024 there were like 4 catchers who got more than 600 plate appearances, and they all DH'd on their off days and played like a full 160, if not a perfect 162. So um, I think the next wave is a little young right now, at least of the top guys between Duno, Tait, and Rodriguez, but they're all very exciting.
Yeah, that was a great breakdown. So, couple last questions. These are not actually prospects, but we mentioned Cal Raleigh, his huge year this year. So, I want to know if you think out of these three people, who will hit the most home runs and then how many that is in 2026. So Hunter Goodman, another sort of not a rookie, a breakout sophomore season in Colorado. The ageless Salvador Perez, who I actually thought was going to fall off before this season. And then he ends up with 30 home runs and 100 RBI again. And then, as mentioned, Cal Raleigh. So he's not going to hit 60 home runs, but who out of that group do you think will hit the most home runs next season?
Man, wouldn't it be funny if I said Hunter Goodman was going to lead this group? Uh, I mean,
It could happen, though. It could.
yeah,
Yeah.
I have to go with Raleigh. Now, like maybe the caveat I'll give is I don't think he's getting to 60 again. I don't know that we'll ever see 60 out of a catcher again, and it's pretty crazy to recognize that in real time.
Yeah.
The ballpark's really working against him. Seattle is the most unfriendly place to hit in Major League Baseball, and so on one hand, that makes it even more impressive. I don't think he can do it again. On the flip side, Hunter Goodman is in one of the more friendly environments to hit, and so for that reason, especially sort of contrasting that to Kaufman, and at some point, Salvador is going to give in to Father Time as everybody does. I'm going to go Raleigh, Goodman, Perez. And a good part of this is also because I think Carter Jensen's going to get a significant amount of playing time next year.
Yeah.
Salvi could still DH,
That
and he probably will need to if he wants to continue performing. But there's going to be fewer plate appearances to go around in Kansas City.
Yeah, he could definitely his time could get eaten into if Jensen comes on. All right. Well, that's all I had, Zach. So I really appreciate you coming on here. Why don't you let everyone know again where they can find you and that great prospect report that you're working on.
Yeah. Well, first, really appreciate you having me on. I'm glad we could connect and that we're local. We'll have to catch a
Yes.
ball game sometime, whether that's the Saints or the Twins. It's sort of immaterial to me. But really pleased to make your acquaintance and to be on the show. You can find me. Most of my stuff just goes on Twitter or Blue Sky, same handle, both places. It's upper_Beck. It's a play on Upper Deck, Beck being my last name. I write for the Dynasty Dugout. It's thedynastydugout.com. It is Chris Clegg's website. It is a subscription website. If you don't want to pay for it, it's fine. Just follow me on Twitter. Most of the concepts that I'm writing about at length, I'm sharing in smaller versions on Twitter. The big thing to check out on my Twitter page is my pinned post is a 185 page top 100 prospect list from last year. I'm looking to reproduce and make even better. That same list this offseason should publish a little bit earlier this year, I hope. I published on like March 25th this year, which is way too close to the major league season for comfort. And so this coming year, I should have it out.
Though. That is still impressive.
This coming year, I should have it out a little bit earlier. I'm getting a jump start, and I'll be posting along the way sort of the fun nuggets that I find as I dig in.
That's awesome. All right. Well, maybe we'll have to have you back on before opening day next season. And once again, thanks for being on.
Love it. I would love to be back. Appreciate you.
All right. Go Brewers.
Go Brewers.
Thanks.